Hello there. My name is Scott McCutcheon with Sovereign Studios. Welcome to, I think this is episode 9 of my Yamaha Virago cafe racer project. I apologize that I haven't, it's been a while since I've posted a video, mostly because I've been having to learn a few new skills to proceed with some of the things that we're going to do here on the Virago. Specifically, I've been having to teach myself how to weld. So I picked myself up a welder, and I've been, tinkering with putting pieces of metal together and that sort of thing. Specifically because we need a few brackets for this thing. And one of those we're actually going to use today. So today I figured we'd take a look at the new headlamp I got. So if you recall from one of my previous videos when we installed this thing, this was busted, and this is a 6.5-inch LED headlamp that came from China. And when it arrived, the glass front was shattered, so I had to go get a new one. The company that I bought it from on eBay refunded me, so I guess that's cool. But either way, I got a new one, so we're going to install that. We're going to install that today, and then something else cool we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and get the gauge cluster on, so I picked that up as well, which is here, and so we'll get this thing installed today too. So I guess we'll do that, but I kind of want to do since it's been a few weeks since I've put everything together, it's not like I've really stopped working. I mean, I've been doing other stuff, but I got most of the parts that we need to finish this thing. So importantly, I picked up the seat, right, which you can see here. I also got the subframe, which I've already kind of installed to make sure I have the right bolts and everything. So subframe and a seat that'll go on that guy. Because the OEM subframe's not going to work, which is under this piece here. That thing's not going to work so well for what we need it for. So we picked up the new things here. There's the rear shock that we're going to talk about probably in the next episode, hopefully. This is a taillight from an '05 Honda CBR 600, or maybe it's a '05 CBR 600 that this taillight came off of. So we're going to use that, but we got to build a custom bracket for it. And then this was the bracket that I built for the gauge cluster, but we'll get into that here real shortly. But that being said, that's a lot of that stuff. So here's the new headlamp. This piece is significantly better than what I had originally, from China. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it's going to take to get that installed. Okay, so first things first, we're just going to want to remove the 6.5-inch headlamp. Before we remove it, you'll want to notice that this thing kind of sits flush, right? And the angle that these brackets are attached to the forks, when I install a larger headlamp, this angle needs to be flushed out. So the trick with this is going to be that we're going to have to loosen up the fork clamps for the brackets and kind of shimmy this out so it can accommodate the 7-inch headlamp. So let's go ahead and get this out. I think it's loose enough to where, yeah, just hand tightened it. We'll pop this out. And if you remember from the last episode, we have these little spacers here, which we don't want to lose. So yeah, I mean, this headlamp, okay, so real quick before we go any further about this headlamp, I'm kind of glad that this happened, right? So when I originally started buying the parts, for this thing, I had thought that I would buy the headlamp, and the headlamp would be low beam and high beam, right? And then that I would buy additional turn signals to mount somewhere. Okay, so I bought this headlamp from on eBay from China. I did the same thing with the turn signals. The headlamp obviously arrived broken. The turn signals didn't arrive at all. So I had to cancel both, basically get refunded for both of these orders. And I'm kind of glad it happened, because once I got the brackets, I realized that there's nowhere really to mount the turn signals on them, you know. So I was going to basically end up having to mount them either directly here with these bolts, or build a custom bracket that can mount on these bolts. And I wasn't particularly enthused with that. So since I had to get a new headlamp anyway, I decided to make the decision that the next headlamp I bought was going to be an integrated one. So when I say integrated, I mean that this headlamp includes a high beam, a low beam, or a low beam, a high beam, and turn signals. Okay, so this way, this headlamp incorporates all the functionality I need to be street legal, and I don't have to go get additional turn signals, and I don't have to worry about figuring out how to mount them. I only need to figure out how to wire them, which I was going to have to do anyway. So that being the case, you can see that obviously this headlamp is a little too large for the bracket position that I currently am using. So we're going to have to widen these out a little bit to get the headlamp in there. But it should be no problem, so let's do that. Real quick, if you've never seen one of these headlamps before, this is basically for a Harley Davidson. I forget exactly what model that this was supposed to replace, but I just bought this on Amazon. I'm really glad that whoever I bought it from, maybe I'll see if I can link it in the description, but whoever I bought it from packed it really well. I mean, this particular piece of foam, you know, helped it seat down there properly, this little piece covering it, and it made it to my house intact, you know, so I'm happy with that. It came with some hardware that I'm not going to use, obviously, because, you know, I already have brackets, you know, more heavy-duty brackets than what came with it. So, again, refer to the last video if you want to know why we chose those brackets. But we'll go ahead and get the new 7-inch headlamp put on. So, let's go ahead and loosen these up. If you recall, it's just going to be these two Allen keys here. I think that one. And we're not going to want to loosen them fully. You know, we're not going to want to actually remove them. We really just want to loosen them so that they can be fiddled with and adjusted. And like that, we're able to kind of shimmy it over. Alright, so let's grab this headlamp. And obviously you want the hole down at the bottom. Not exactly sure what that threaded slot is for. Maybe it's for something on the Harley. I don't know. But obviously the lamp itself, I'm not gonna open it up, but the lamp itself is replaceable. If you pop these two screws out, you can take this whole face off. You may have to pop that one out too. But you can pop this whole face off and replace the bulb if that whole thing dies. So that whole thing is sealed. This is really just the housing. Right, so you'll notice that this washer comes with a rubber grommet, a washer, and a lock washer, in addition to the nut. So we're going to want the rubber grommet and the washer at the base of the headlamp. Okay. And then, what is this little, don't forget this little washer here. Right? And then the lock washer and the nut on the other side. Oh, look at that. That bolt's not going to be long enough to fit through my brackets. So, we're going to need to find a different bolt. Okay, so, I guess I kind of lucked out in two places, right? So, this is the bolt that came with the 7-inch headlamp. And while it does come with the rubber grommet, a washer, a lock washer, and this tiny ass bolt, the fact is that this tiny ass bolt is just too tiny to fit through this thick bracket that I've got. So I gotta find longer bolts. Luckily, I happen to have longer bolts, only because they came with the 6.5-inch headlamp. So the 6.5-inch headlamp has significantly longer bolts that we can use instead. Luckily, something else I also like about the bolts that came with the 6.5-inch headlamp is that they've got a washer in addition to the lock washer, which is something that the bolts that came with the 7-inch headlamp did not come with. So they were kind of expecting that lock washer to bite into, I guess, whatever bracket. And that's not going to work out super well for me with those brackets. So let's use these. They are the same thread pitch, so they'll bolt in. We could forego the lock washer that came with the 7-inch headlamp, since this one has one, but we still want to use the rubber grommet and the headlamp itself, along with that washer there. So we'll slide all this stuff in, and you'll see we have, you know what, I think I can get rid of this internal washer. Well, nah, we'll leave it. Kind of a tight fit, but should be okay. Let's go ahead and get this mounted in. Alright, and we'll kind of shimmy it into place. It's a much wider headlamp than the 6.5, obviously. And we'll try and get them to be more or less as straight as we can get it. Yeah. Cool. Alright. And then we tighten everything back down, and we'll be set. And of course we'll worry about the angle of the beam later. You know, once we're actually getting ready to ride, we can kind of readjust that. Okay. Right, tightened back up. So it looks pretty good. I think that's going to be sharp. Very good. Yeah, I think it's going to be better with a 7-inch headlamp, and I'm definitely excited that it's got the integrated turn signals. So yeah, the 7-inch headlamp definitely makes it look a little beefier. Not too bad. Not bad at all. Alright, so let's do the next piece of the puzzle. Okay, before we get any further into this video, one thing I wanted to mention about this. We haven't done any wiring yet on this guy. You may have noticed I've got the whole wiring harness split up over there, kind of ready to go. But we're not going to be doing any wiring today either. But specifically, I did want to make a note of this, right, where apparently this wiring harness came with the headlamp. Okay, so like I said, this was a headlamp from a Harley Davidson. I'm pretty sure these are the turn signal lights here that you plug into. One of them's probably ground, the other's probably the power for each turn signal. I'm not exactly sure on that yet. I need to go look at the wiring harness again, but I'm pretty sure this particular harness was for whatever Harley Davidson this light was for. In which case, you know, you plug it in like this, plug it in there, and then this end would plug into the Harley. Obviously, this does nothing for me because I don't have the other end of the connector. So I'm probably gonna have to figure out something else for this. I'll probably keep this plug and still use this end of the connector, but so when we actually get around to doing the wiring harness, we're gonna have to split that up. Split that up somehow and go from there. Yeah, we're gonna want to keep the plug, I guess. Simply because of how it's engineered. So we'll get there, but not quite. So let's go ahead and do the next piece of the puzzle, which is the gauge cluster. So when it comes to the gauge cluster, obviously you can see that the original Virago came with this. Okay. Pretty standard tachometer, speedometer, mileage, trip meter, indicators for the high beam, oil level, neutral, and then a left and right turn signal. This one is blank. As far as I'm aware, there were no other indicators or LEDs in here. That's just what it was. So how this worked, it had a cable plugged in here that ran down to the wheel, which I probably still have somewhere. It's probably in this bucket. Well, I know I still have it, but where the wheel speed sensor was, and that would obviously tell you how fast you were going. So we need to find a replacement for that. Luckily, the gauge cluster I bought has one. We'll go over that here in a second. As far as the RPMs, that's, you know, the kind of thing that we should be able to get direct from the ignition. You know, so the ignition should tell us what the RPMs are looking like. And then, of course, all these other little switches in here are all rigged up to the wiring harness, or all the lighting, you know, indicators. So all that should be ready to go. But either way, we're going to end up having to splice up all these wiring harnesses right here, cut up all this stuff, and replace that. So my desire when I started building this bike, I really wanted to get it in a situation where I could replace both of these clusters with a single pod. I wanted just one gauge, not two, but one. It became really, really difficult to find a gauge cluster that incorporated all of the features and functionality of these two clusters. I came real close, not perfect, but this one has an RPM, a digital speedometer, left and right turn signals, a neutral indicator, a high beam indicator, and the one that it's missing is the oil level indicator, but this one does have this other like flashing beam thing. I'm not really sure exactly what they intended that to be, but I guess I'm going to use it as my oil level indicator. So if that goes on, it'll be telling me the oil is bad. This one includes a couple other features as well, like a gear position indicator and stuff like that we're probably not going to use. This one also has fuel level, which I'm not sure that we're going to use that either, because the original Virago did not come with a fuel level gauge. So we're just going to have to roll with it, unless we do that aftermarket. Either way, I figured this was going to be a pretty good deal. It comes with all the wiring and everything like that. There's obviously a guide on how to install it, wire it up, and configure it, which is going to take a little bit of effort. Because it looks relatively complicated to actually configure. I guess it has a voltage light too, so maybe we can use that. Yeah, so we have a right signal, a distance light. I'm not really sure what that is. Outline marker lamp. Don't know what that is. Oh, there it is. They call it a marker light. Okay, so we'll end up using the marker light as our oil level light. But the rest of it's pretty basic, so that's that. Either way, what this did come with was a few mounting things, specifically, these rubber grommets that go around the pegs here, some aluminum spacers for those, washers and nuts to hold it on. What it did not come with was a bracket. So in my case, it became kind of difficult to decide exactly how this was going to mount, because this is a relatively custom build, right? The fact that I'm trying to mount it onto a Yamaha R6 front end, that's not really something that people commonly do with this type of gauge cluster. So it's not like you can just go out and buy one of these brackets. So what I decided to do is the fact that there's really just not many places to mount it anywhere around here. I went ahead and unbolted the brake fluid reservoir here and decided I was going to use this mounting point, which is where this the brake fluid reservoir goes. Like the brake fluid reservoir just mounts right here, right? I decided I was going to use this same bolt or same bracket space mounting point as the mounting point for the gauge cluster. So to do that, I decided that I was going to have to build a bracket. So in this case, I've built a bracket that follows the contour of the back of the gauge cluster, okay, like so, extends itself out, and then I've welded an additional arm down here, so that it can be mounted. And then you'll see I've chopped it off and angled it this way so that it sits flush against the R6 triple tree. Okay, so in this case, now it should just mount right here, and I'll be able to still access the key, and I'll have a pretty good mounting space for my gauge. So this was a piece of 1/8 inch steel, I think, and it worked out pretty well. Yeah, so 10 gauge steel, or no, there we go, yeah, 1/8 inch steel. So I just took a little bit of 1/8 inch steel, welded it together to make this bracket. Drilled a couple holes. You know, it's not pretty, but I gave it a paint job. It's black. Most of it's going to be covered anyway. You're not going to look at it. But the nature of this is that before I install it, I want to actually put it together so that I really only have to deal with it there. And you'll see that this back end has this little like trip button. Obviously you needed to make the bracket small enough to where that button's still accessible. You know, so altogether I think this is going to work out pretty well. So the idea being that we should be able to pop these little rubber grommets in here. I already kind of mangled that one, but it's okay. After which the aluminum spacer can slide right in there. Right. So I'm not going to go over exactly how to make this bracket. You know, obviously I did this off camera. It took me about a day to actually make this bracket. I'm not much of a metal worker, you know, so this is kind of new to me. I'd say I did okay. This is really like the first, or maybe not the first, but this is the first like good welds that I did, you know, to make this bracket. And since we're going to be doing a few more brackets for this thing, you know, I figured I'd get good at welding, so that's how we're going to do it, you know. I think it worked out great. See how well that worked out? Look at that. Booyah. And we kind of tighten it down. So I'm really happy with that. I think this bracket is perfect. And yeah, it was custom made kind of thing, but it's the kind of thing that it's super sturdy now. You know, I'm not gonna have to worry about the gauge cluster fucking up every time I poke it. You know, what am I looking for? Wrench. So I did want it to be sturdy, and that's why I built it out of 1/8 inch steel. Too thick, and I think it was going to be too heavy and wasn't going to fit on that mounting point very easily. But if you go any lighter, it's susceptible to bending, just considering the nature of it, and I didn't want that. So 1/8 inch is where you want to go. Obviously, you know, like I said, I'm not really going to go over how to build this bracket. You're just going to have to use your own ingenuity if you want to do that. But it really wasn't that hard. It just took some time and patience. And there we go. Right? So that's the gauge cluster and the bracket. I think worked out great. So the trick with this guy, mounting him in here, what I do with the little bolt. There it is. So this is the original bolt that comes with it. I'm pretty sure we'll still be able to use it even with the 1/8 inch extra space. You want to make sure that these wires get tucked in a good spot, and for me that's going to be right there. And then it goes right there. Okay. I'm going to want to remember to put this bracket back. Slide this guy in its place. Mount everything down. We may need a longer one. Oops. Alright, so now we're back to it. Good enough for me. Alright. Very good. Let's go ahead and mount the brake fluid reservoir back. And there we go. All mounted up. And it's just about perfect. Right? Easy access to the key. A good look at the gauge cluster. Yeah. It's good, man. It's good. I like it. It's pretty sharp. Okay, so there's one last step for us to concern ourselves with before we call it a night on this video. Specifically, is this guy, the wheel speed sensor. So this gauge cluster obviously has a speedometer. But on the R6 has a different speed sensing method than the Virago did. The Virago had a wheel speed sensor down here. I'm not exactly sure what the R6 had, but it's not a wheel sensor on the front end as far as I can tell. If there is one, I don't know where it is. I really don't think there is one, at least not on my end, but yeah, so the idea here is that this wheel speed sensor came with the gauge cluster, and so we're just going to use it. So this is a real simple wheel speed sensor. All it really does is sense a magnet, and as that magnet passes by, it picks itself up. The real question is, right, how do you mount it onto the R6 front end? The R6 was obviously never designed for this, so we're going to have to figure out how to do this. Basically, this guy comes up here, plugs into the gauge cluster up here somewhere. Obviously, you can see we have a little bit of slack in there, so we're going to end up routing this basically up the brake line. We'll zip tie it up there and get it up there close to the gauge cluster so we can plug it in. It did come with this bracket, which I guess we are going to use. I went and flattened it out. It's basically just a crappy piece of aluminum. Really nothing to it. But these particular mounting points right here at the base of the forks were for the R6 fascia, like the front cowl I guess. I don't really know what to call it. This piece, basically, right? That sits over the front wheel, kind of like it does here on my CBR, right? So that front fender, obviously I've removed it, but these were the mounting points for it on the R6. So we're going to reuse this mounting point to mount the wheel speed sensor. So I've gone ahead and flattened it out, and we're going to do that. So how this works, basically it's a inductive magnetic pickup. It needs to sense these magnets as they rotate. The real question is, where do you put this magnet? Unfortunately, on the R6, there really aren't very many good places to put this thing. You know, so I don't really know what's the best option, but for me, and I don't really know if this is going to work out so well, but this is what I'm going to roll with to begin with, and we'll find out over time if this works okay. But there's only a few places that you can put these magnets, because everything else on the R6 is pretty much aluminum. So obviously the magnet needs to spin with the wheel. You can't put it on the wheel because guess what? The wheels are aluminum. I suppose maybe you could glue them onto the wheel, which may be safer if you choose to go that route. But for me, right now, I'm going to try and get it onto the brake rotor. And really the only safe places to put it on the brake rotor, because of where it spins, you know, is really going to be right about here. You know, so that it can not contact any of this stuff. Okay, because there's really not a lot of clearance there, but luckily these magnets are thin. But the kit came with 3 different magnets. I've got the other 2 right here. So it came with 3. The guide mentions using 2. It doesn't mention using 3. Number of magnetic steel setting, which I assume that you can specify how many of these you've put there so it knows when to pick up. So there were 3 in mine, so we're gonna go ahead and put all 3 in there, I suppose, various points of the wheel. And I don't know if this is gonna work, but we're gonna roll with it. What I found is that the size of these magnets is perfect to slide right into here. So you can push the magnets in there, and luckily the nature of it is such that it's really hard to get that magnet out, unless you push on it from the other end. So like the way this tapers in there, you can't push it out the other side. Okay, you can only push it out this side. But once it's in there, it's magnetic in there, so it's stuck in there pretty good, and I don't see it just knocking itself out. But I guess it could. I don't really know if that's going to be good or not, because it's not like these magnets are super fucking strong. But either way, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of place these in various locations across the wheel. I guess one here, right? Maybe another right here. And that way they're kind of evenly spread, or mostly evenly spread. Yeah. 2, 2, 3. So should be okay. But then the idea is that I need to basically mount the wheel speed sensor here so that it picks up the magnets as they pass by. To that end, we got a bracket. We're going to mount it kind of like right there. I got a big fat washer on this end to help space out this extra huge opening that they put there. Yeah, easily done. One washer underneath the screw, and so that it flattens that piece out. After which we can pretty much just tighten it down right here. So unfortunately, the nature of this particular bracket is going to be that it's always going to be able to kind of like flex a little bit like that. I'm not like particularly enthused by that, but it is what it is. We'll tighten it down in a minute. So how this works is it pretty much is just going to slide in sort of like that. And we'll try and get it as close to that magnet as possible so that it gets a good signal, right? So like something like that should be back it out a little bit. Something like that should be pretty good. I think I kind of want washers for this, but I guess it's not super important. And just wrench it down on there. And then again, we're going to want to make sure that it lines up with this magnet, the holes pretty well, so that the magnets can get caught or picked up. Once you have it aligned real well, go ahead and tighten it. And that should do pretty good for the wheel speed sensor. So that should be mounted there, and as the rotor spins, it'll pick up the magnet here to tell us how fast we're going. So as far as actually getting it plugged up here, we're going to have to do a little creative zip tying. So let's just grab a couple of these. So keep in mind that this cord, is shielded, or the wiring is at least shielded, but you don't want it to get caught anywhere. So you need to be real careful about how you route it. In this case, what I think the best routing is going to be to zip tie it sort of like this. So that it's tied to this brake line here. And I don't want to, it would look cleaner if I routed it on the inside, but I'm concerned about, the potential for getting caught in the brake rotor and tearing this up. So I'd rather avoid it if possible, even though you probably could route it behind the fork, right? If you were careful with it, you probably could route it like this. Which might be a little cleaner. But again, for the sake of safety, I'd rather not get it caught up in the rotor if the zip tie failed for whatever reason. So we're going to leave it outside the fork. I do think feeding it through here will be cleaner and safer. So in case it does come unplugged or it fails for whatever reason, at least it's, I guess, I don't know. I think it'll just be cleaner like this. So we'll do it like this. One zip tie here. And you'll want to leave a little slack in case you ever need to remove this bracket for any reason. You're not having to pull the zip tie off. And I guess try and get it around the metal bit if you can. And we're going to kind of like snake it around the hose here. We'll add another zip tie right here. And then yeah, we'll want to keep kind of wrapping it around just so that it keeps a taut line, as well as shortens some of the length of this wire, since it's a little long, a little longer than what we needed for it. Wrap it around a little bit like that, and then I'm going to put another zip tie right here. And make sure it's tight around the hose. You know, you don't want any extra slack where it doesn't need to be. All right. Now, I'm pretty sure it's this one, since they're all moderately coated. And now you're plugged up into the gauge cluster. So really we just need to figure out a way to tuck all this, but we'll probably worry about that when we actually do the rest of the wiring harness, since I can pretty much just wrap it in. So for now, we'll just kind of stuff it back there. Right? And eventually we'll get to doing all the rest of the wiring. Let's go ahead and clip these zip tie bits to clean this up. And there's your wheel speed sensor. So altogether, I think that worked out real well. As you can see, you can barely even tell it's installed. I mean, not really. You can tell it's installed. But I think it worked out okay. Hopefully those magnets will stay in the right position over time. But altogether, I feel pretty good about that. I'm really happy with the bracket. I think that turned out excellent. Real happy with the headlamp. The new headlamp I think looks great. I love the fact that it's got the integrated turn signals. I think that worked out really well, or is going to work out really well, as it prevents me from having to, you know, add extra turn signals down there. Even though it might actually look really good, you know, if I mounted some turn signals down here, but we're not going to bother. So, fully integrated. Yeah, so hopefully in the next episode, I really need to figure out what to do with cables. I'm really disappointed because cables have been a huge pain to figure out, if only because I can't use the R6 cables, and the OEM Virago cables don't really work so well either. And the only people that I know of that can do custom cables is Motion Pro, and I've sent them 2 emails so far, and it's been a month now, and they haven't responded to me, so I'm not really sure what to do about that. But hopefully in the next video we're talking about cables. At the very least, we are going to hopefully discuss this, which is the rear shock. So the rear shock really needs to happen before I can progress on the back end and get the subframe on and start doing the wiring and the battery and everything like that. So that's really pretty much the next step, is I need to do that rear shock. So that's going to be a task to do, and one of the reasons I'm holding off on it is because I need to build a bracket to mount that thing in there. But I've got the design ready to go, I just need to build it, so we're going to build it maybe in the next episode, and we'll go from there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully your bike might be coming along, starting to look a little bit like mine, and I'd like to see them, post them up, you know, give me a link, something like that, that'd be cool. Yeah, either way, maybe check out my game, Ethereal Legends, on Steam, and if you enjoyed this video, give me a like, a subscribe, something like that. Hope you guys have a good one. Thanks again.